to you, McGraw and Kelly.
So the news conference was at Trump Tower in Washington, in New York City, but I can only imagine it reverberated in Washington. What were the sights and sounds like, and what are you hearing from Washington on this?
You know, it's still reverberating. I think everybody can sort of feel it here in Washington, and that's why so many people today waking up perhaps with a headache. To be absolutely clear, this is not a partisan issue in Washington. So many Republican lawmakers are standing up to the president, the leader of their party, really condemning what they see as ambiguity in the president's most recent remarks, worry that it's sowing confusion and emboldening hate groups and making excuses in the defense of white supremacists. In fact, we saw white supremacists responding positively to the president's most recent remarks yesterday. That's why we're hearing, like, from Republican Senator Jerry Moran, quote, white supremacists, he says, no, speaking of these groups, they have no place in our society, and no one, especially POTUS, meaning the President of the United States, should ever tolerate it. This is continuing to be an issue, especially for Republicans, because they had thought with the president being a Republican, they would get some of their legislative agenda passed, and it has taken all of the oxygen out of the room.
Lana, we're hearing that this was supposed to be a news conference on infrastructure, and right. Donald Trump just decided at the last minute to bring all this up and sort of re-litigate this, or how did this all happen?
So as journalists will always do whenever the president speaks, they had questions. They started asking him about it, and the president decided to engage. But it quickly seemed that the president, perhaps feeling on the defensive, went on to defend not only his remarks, but the Unite the Right protesters, which included these alt-right white supremacists and neo-Nazis. The president saying, quote, you also had people that were very fine people on both sides, but for so many Americans, the idea that any person could be a fine person and marching in lockstep with people wearing swastikas does not compute, and it doesn't sound right coming from the lips of the president of the United States.
So what are we hearing? We're hearing that the White House and the staff was speechless as they watched this. What are you hearing?
A lot of people looking at the new chief of staff, General John Kelly, who is expected to bring discipline and new structure to this White House, looking at his face during the remarks, how he was not looking at the president, looking down often at the floor or at the ceiling. So many folks in the White House telling us privately that they were caught completely off guard by these comments. Some people wondering if they should be taking the advice of Republican Senator Orrin Hatch and doing some moral soul searching. And we heard the official response coming from the White House. They sent out a notice to us journalists saying, quote, the president was entirely correct in talking about assigning blame to both sides, but in so many ways that misses the point. It isn't about whether or not there were bad people who were spoiling for a fight, who went out as part of the counter protesters. The fundamental truth is that a woman died at the hands of a neo-Nazi in Charlottesville. And for the president to sound like in any way like he might be excusing that the behavior of the white supremacist groups that led to that, that's part of why there's such outrage. It isn't the partisan volleyball that some people think it is. And I would encourage every person to listen to the president's remarks in their entirety so that they don't feel like the media is slicing and dicing it, but just listen to what the president had to say and whether or not that truly reflects our ideals as a nation. How
much did he actually talk about infrastructure before this digressed into this shouting match between him and reporters?
He spoke about it a bit, and the day before he had spoken about China. There are efforts on the part of the Trump administration to try and get the president to focus on these policy issues, but where he speaks with passion isn't on this, isn't on these policy issues. It isn't with talking about infrastructure. It was when he was defensive and seeming to defend himself alongside these groups, and that's part of where it became problematic.
That is Lana Zak, ABC News correspondent in Washington, D.C. Lana, thanks for your time.
Thank you, McGraw.
7:25.